Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back for another EVE Online video. In today's video we are back in Amarr, the second largest trade hub in EVE Online, to take a look at its growth, because there does seem to be quite a decent amount of growth and a little bit as expected in the baseline, I'm going to say, of the EVE Online sandbox economy. Some of the bulkier resources that can be pretty hard to move. So let's dive right in and go take a look at the market here for the minerals, and we'll start with titanium just as we do with EVE Talk. And somewhere mid August is when Nyarja fell, so we always have to go back here on the chart and see if we have any changes. And of course we also have the jump in prices because of CCP's announcement that there is going to be even more drought, even less availability of resources, and that some minerals are going to become unique to certain areas of space. But it is very noticeable that since mid-August we have a clear increase in the daily trade volumes for titanium, and not just the spike on that latest announcement. So for titanium, it really does look like there has been a lot more trades happening in Amarr, which to me makes a lot of sense. Of course, titanium is by far the bulkiest mineral, the hardest one to move from one place to another. And with Nyarja making a high-sec trip to Jita super long, like 50 jumps or something like that, 40 plus at least, it's just something that players are not going to do as much, and they will try to find a different place to sell them that's closer by, and that of course would be Amarr, the second trade hub. So clearly in titanium this is confirmed. Let's jump up to pyrite. Not as visible, but if we take a look here, we of course also have the jump up in price, which is quite significant. We're currently running out of pyrite in Amarr and selling it for almost 12 ISK. Ooh, that's actually really important. We're selling titanium for a little bit less than 8 ISK, which is actually quite a bit cheaper than in Jita, if you take a look at EVE Talk from a couple of days ago. And then we have pyrite that's here at 12 ISK, which is more expensive than titanium. That inverse situation that has been plaguing, you could say, titanium and pyrite in Amarr has already reversed itself. That's actually pretty damn major. You can still grab cheaper titanium in Amarr, so very good for local producers, but pyrite is jumping up in price above the price of titanium. Very interesting stuff. But you can also see here, especially in mid-September, that the volumes have been higher consistently throughout the last month or so, and so definitely have some rumblings happening around the fall of Nyarja too in this pyrite market. So this is on the one hand not so good for industrialists, but for miners and producers this is of course quite nice. They're getting way more ISK for their pyrite here in Amarr than they are in Jita. Super interesting. I hadn't even noticed that when I first came back to scout. Here we have Mexlon, not really a bottleneck in my opinion in high-sec, but in null-sec it is, so it's always been decently expensive, and it is here as well. 100 ISK for the sellers, which is more expensive than in Jita, 95 ISK for the buyers. Quite a bit of competition, quite a bit of demand. And again, look at the peaks are definitely higher than before, and we have this much larger base, or well, much, it's not that much. It's not like all of a sudden we have double the volumes that are consistently being traded here every day, but it's pretty noticeable that since half August we have a higher daily trade volume in Mexlon as well, and a very good price. We'll just go down the route for Isogen. I'm very curious as well. Here is the jump, of course, as Isogen is going to become a low-sec specific mineral that has spooked the market quite a little bit. We started at 12.5 ISK. Let's also keep that reverse in mind here again as well. Mexlon going for 100 ISK. Isogen used to be more expensive than Mexlon, and it was at like 10% of the 12.5% of the price to be exact at the start of the year. We were gradually increasing in price, of course, as the resource drought started to hit the game, but this latest change has brought a frenzy for the Isogen market, and we're up to 69 ISK for the sellers. That's approaching the 100 ISK. At least we're approaching parity a little bit here. 54 ISK for the buyers. Pretty damn expensive, and it's not super noticeable, but you can clearly see here that we have some periods of increased volumes ever since pretty much the mid of August, so the fall of Nyarja yet again. Noxium should see another big jump. There it is, also becoming something that you'll have to go to low sec for, and we have a jump up to over 1,000 disk, and we're still there, probably 1,000 disk for the sellers, 971 for the buyers. If you're at the moment producing Noxium, which is part of the reason why I'm actually mining a little bit extra at the moment, that all looks very, very promising. And then of course here you could see a little bit less. You know, Noxium is starting to be one mineral that's a little bit easier to move, not so bulky to get big volumes out, and so that increase in daily trade volumes is a lot less visible. Here is Zydrine, also doing really well in price, actually 1,700 disks. So some of these minerals are way more expensive here in Amarr, but we're also this to me does look like we have increased volumes for Zydrine, Megasite, couple of spikes, and also more expensive than in Jita. So while I thought that someone will ask for it, so here is Morphite, by the way, which of course has also had that massive jump, actually went up to above 25,000 disk on a couple of days. It's now settling at a little bit over 20,000 disk. But the general vibe here, to me personally, what makes it very interesting is the relatively cheap titanium, despite the fact that the volumes are up, then pyrite overtaking titanium, and most of these other minerals, specifically those that you'll probably need to import a lot, like Noxium, like Zydrine, are actually more expensive than in Jita at the moment, which makes for a very interesting picture where I think Amarr, that has a lot of high-sec systems with a lot of mining potential, is currently very attractive to miners. I think that low titanium price is also still reasonably attractive to industrialists, but they have to be careful that they don't overshoot the price in these other minerals. On the other hand, there is clearly strong demand as well to create that increased price. All of this to me are indications that the Amarr market is growing, and that there is this local hub of activity going into mining, going into industry, creating that demand for these higher prices that are all signs for growth through a very baseline economy, of course. Take one, production, and these base minerals coming from regular mining. Let's take a look at something else that I had noticed, and that is going to be the salvaged materials. So that's an indication of like PvE activity, missioning, exploring, stratting, things like that. But it's also something that can become decently bulky pretty quickly. So we're talking salvaged materials, and this is a pretty huge list, including Tech 2 stuff. But we'll try to focus a little bit on some of these more general ones. Armor plates here, these alloyed titanium bars. Again, look at mid-August and look at the increased volumes that we have been able to maintain. Very, very noticeable in the armor plates. Look at that, everything before August, you know, hovering at maybe 17,000 or something like that units per day, and now we're basically 25,000 on average every day. Very, very noticeable increase in trade, and this is also, in my opinion, part of the base economy, part of the industry that's very accessible. Creating rigs is not that difficult. Salvaged materials, blueprints that are not too expensive, not too hard to research, very easy to jump into. Artificial neural networks are a bit different. I think they're a bit less common. You can clearly see that on the volumes as well, but you still very clearly see how we see next to no volumes at the start of the year, and then here, since the fall of Nyanja, we do have these higher volumes. Broken drone transceivers confirming that trend here as well. Burnt logic circuits, that's pretty damn common, and this is really beautiful. Look at that, mid-August, and this is practically double the volumes, 25k right here. Quite a few days and some bottoms below that, and since the mid-August we have not gone below that 25k period. This is today's volume, so we still have quite a ways to go, but yeah, it's almost double. 50k is now that 25k stop gap, so very, very impressive increase in the trade of these salvaged materials. Same thing in the capacitor consoles. Eventually we'll get to some of these exceptions, probably tied to Tech 2 stuff, and some of them are still pretty low in volumes, that it's not super noticeable. But I would say that across the board here again, it's pretty noticeable. You have some spikes, of course, but it's pretty noticeable that the volumes have increased pretty nicely since the fall of Nyarja. I must warn you guys, of course, you could start to make projections on this. All right, increased industry, increased activity, the Amarr trade hub growing. Perhaps it could even take some of the other markets away from JITA as well. At the moment, I would say that, yeah, Amarr is doing really well in bulky materials, baseline production and industry, Tech 1 stuff, things like that. Tech 2, factions, things that are smaller and more expensive. I think that is still massively dominated by JITA. Will that start to move? That is very difficult to foresee, but it's also very noticeable that, or it should be noted that we still don't know what the outcome of the invasions will be. So it is possible that Nyarja will at some point become passable again. And I don't want to make like false promises by showing, hey, look at how well the Amarr market is growing here again. Enhanced Ward consoles, very, very noticeable increased volumes since the fall of Nyarja. What this is more about is that impact on the sandbox, where one system, like how far is it? Let's take a quick look at that. I can do a to JITA. Let's go JITA right here. Set destination. Just a couple jumps out here, Nyarja. One change here has that very big impact on this trade hub when it comes to the volumes of quite a few of these materials. You get some weird ones that are for the new Edencom ships and things like that, but salvaged materials definitely confirming that there's increased volumes for something that is pretty baseline. And then another one that I looked at is actually research. Of course, BPCs and things like that and research become very important if you're doing more industry. And let's take a look at these decryptors that can basically give you better outcomes for invention, so turning Tech 1 BPCs into Tech 2 BPCs. And look at that. Accelerant decryptor, clearly an increased volume here as well. Attainment decryptor, very noticeable, higher peaks, more consistent higher peaks and an increased volume. And we can go over the entire list, but I actually checked that before starting the video. This is just uniform across the board. I'm seeing more trades in these decryptors as well. Not as pronounced as, for instance, in these salvaged materials, but look at this parity decryptor. Very clearly we have a baseline that's much closer to 500, where before August you could see a baseline of maybe 250 to 300, something like that. Obviously, which I think is normal. This is a great opportunity, and there is a bit of a forcing of more local industry. It's quite normal that you then also add in a little bit of research. It's not that much extra effort. You've got the blueprints anyways, and so you can see here that symmetry, the process decryptor up in volumes as well, and then symmetry finally not that noticeable, but the peaks are higher, and then that baseline again reaching that 500. The month before that way below this, and it's hard to find a period that is as filled as this latest one. So these are three indicators of growth in the Amarr market. I'm reading this as quite a bit more industry that is now happening locally. We'll perhaps later down the line take a look at perhaps some of these finished products, and I'm mostly looking at Tech 1 chips, Tech 1 products, munitions, things like that. For now, we're gonna try to keep this one a little bit shorter, but this is a very good sign. And if you look at these mineral prices, of course, titanium still being that much, quite a bit lower actually than in JITA. That's going for 9 ISK and upwards towards 10, I think, for the sellers. Here we still have pretty massive discount. This is also quite normal. As was said, Amarr is the empire with the most high-sec system, and thus with the highest mining potential, and that means that you should expect higher potential close supplies of titanium in the Amarr market, which creates this opportunity, of course, of getting one of the most important and bulky materials cheaper than in JITA, and that could be a massive incentive for what seems to be happening here, a move of industrial activity closer to the Amarr trade hub rather than the JITA trade hub. And then quite a few of these others are actually expensive, which to me is not necessarily a bad thing. If you look at Dital, for instance, we've got Nullsec next door for Zydra and for Megasite. We've got a couple of low-sec islands, in fact, not very far away from Dital. If you want to risk doing a little bit of mining for Noxium and for Isogen, potentially I think with the local residents, you don't have these massive low-sec organized pirates group. It could also be easier to make a deal with them. And so I think that there is this potential that Amarr, if not just becoming the biggest trade hub or something like that, I mean, there's just so much sunken cost in GTAF for so many players already that that's not going to happen. But a big growth in minerals and thus the baseline industry of Tech 1 stuff, Tech 1 production, things like that, massively growing in Amarr. I think that is definitely in the cards, and all of these first metrics that we're taking a look at here are definitely indicating in that direction. And so the actual outcome of the Zenith for the invasions could be super important and something we have to keep an eye on. I also wanted to check this. I actually didn't do it before starting the video, but we saw in the dev blog about the resource distribution that the ores related to the invasions went up quite substantially in the amount of tritanium and things like that that they can yield. And look at that, just also indicating that if you want to follow this story along, you have to keep an eye on the invasions and what's going to happen here. Look at the amount of Edencom fortresses, which potentially also yield sites with all of those special ores, with lots of tritanium and other stuff as well. Look at how many there are here. 3 jumps away, 2 of them, 4 jumps away, 3, 4 of them, 5 jumps away, including a low-sec one. That could be really interesting. An Edencom fortress in low-sec, potentially there for Isogen and Noxium. 5 jumps away, 6 jumps away. So we have a lot of Edencom fortresses not that far away from Amarr as well, potentially becoming another source of minerals as the changes continue. But of course, again, we don't know what's going to happen with these Edencom fortresses, or with, I should maybe look at the other side as well then, Triglavian invasions and final liminalities. Yeah, Nyarza 3 jumps out, but then it's Ravaros 6 jumps, 7 jumps out, 9 jumps out. You can clearly see that that feels like it's a little bit further away from than all these Edencom fortresses, and so that impact, depending on exactly what happens, could be very different as well. So that is, to me, super interesting, full of potential, but also, as always, with EVE Online and the sandbox, full of very unknown factors for the future. But at the moment, very promising for miners and industry in the Amarr region, in my opinion. And then, of course, the big unknown, the Triglavian invasions and the impact that all of that will have on this entire story. And that's what I wanted to share with you guys for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.